process of going up the chain, they eventually are able to identify the kind of legendary bookmaker known as only as Mr. G. They didn't know who Mr. G was, but ultimately they were able to find that Mr. G was Harry Gross. And finally they were able to find him and arrest him. And that's where it all began tumbling down.
You mentioned somebody who is a protagonist in the story, Floyd Lane, who maybe more than anyone else manages to pick up the pieces. He's one of the players implicated in the scandal. What happens after the scandal is revealed? You said that he only spent $110 of the $3,000, but he can't go into the NBA. He's blacklisted. Where does he go from there?
Floyd Lane is really an incredible story. He's still alive. He's one of the last guys left. He's 89 years old and going strong, and I'm happy to say that he attended the launch of this book at City College, came up on stage and did the question and answer session with me. He's really an amazing person, incredibly honorable, dignified person who really spent his life trying to show the world that he was not the person that they thought he was, that he was a good, decent person. As you mentioned, he spent years trying to get into the NBA. Several times he thought he was going to get a tryout, and each time he was finally denied. He said, if I could just get 5 or 10 minutes on an NBA court, those 5 or 10 minutes could change the whole course of my life. But he was always denied. Finally, by the 1960s, he had sort of given up his dream of playing in the NBA. He loved kids. He loved basketball, of course. And he went to work in community centers in New York, in the South Bronx, the worst parts of New York and the worst years of New York's history, the 1960s and 1970s, working with kids to get them off of drugs, to get them out of gangs, away from violence, to help them continue with their education. One of these kids who he became a kind of surrogate father to was a kid known in the neighborhood as Tiny. His real name was Nate Archibald, and Nate Tiny Archibald would go on to have a Hall of Fame career in the NBA with Floyd as his kind of surrogate father. When kids wanted to go on with their education, Floyd found them. He talked to college administrators. He talked to athletic directors. He found them scholarship money for tuition, for books. He estimated himself that he had helped 400 kids get into college. But other people say the number was actually much higher than that. And then he also began to devote himself to coaching high school. And in 1974, and this is just amazing, and I really couldn't believe it when I discovered this. In 1974, the position of head coach of City College opened up, and Floyd applied for it. And amazingly, he got the job. 23 years earlier, he had been escorted off of the City College campus by 2 New York City detectives. Now he was the head coach at City College. It was this incredible moment of redemption for him, and he said in his press conference, they say that a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. Well, I went, all the way around, but I finally got back home. It was really just an incredible moment for him.
What was his coaching career like?
He coached at City for, I want to say 15 years. He was the second longest, his tenure was the second longest coach at City College, only behind the legendary coach, Nat Holman. But other than that, I think he had the most successful college career of anybody at City.
Well, I want to look at this retrospectively and think about what this means. And there's a lot of things that can be drawn from the story, from collegiate players, corruption in sports and city politics, and redemptive arcs for different people. Let's start with something that we did touch on earlier, which has the most contemporary resonance of football coaches and basketball coaches for state colleges that are paid $2 to $3 million. when they get, how many public school teachers' salaries would that be? 100 or maybe even more. And it's all built upon the indentured servitude of college students that are maybe thrown a communications degree and then get to graduate without debt in a not so great job market.
If they get to graduate, the graduation rates of college athletes are very, very low.
Oh, yeah. I remember in my dorm when the schedule for college students really doesn't set them up for academic success at all, no matter what athletic directors and others are saying. So how do you think this incident has resonance to today's debate about collegiate athletes?
Yeah, those are really good questions. The conditions that led to this point-shaving scandal in 1951 are even worse today than they were then. At the time, Nat Holman, the coach of City College, the legendary coach, Nat Holman, was making $8,500 a year in salary, which is equivalent to about $90,000 today. Well, now you have 69 coaches, basketball coaches in college, who make more than $1 million a year. And you have guys like Calipari and Krzyzewski who are making upwards of $7 million a year. The NCAA signed a contract and a TV extension worth $8.8 billion, right? You have universities who are making millions off their association with sneaker companies for whom the players are kind of walking billboards for their products. They're like NASCAR cars, with the advertisements all over them. The level of disjunction between the amount of money that's flowing through the game and the state of these poor kids who are not allowed to get any of it's just getting greater and greater and greater. These young basketball players in particular, it's true about football players too, but especially basketball players, they're in a situation almost unique in American society, which is that they are poor people who are able to generate enormous profits for other people, but aren't allowed to partake of any of it themselves. That's a situation which is ripe for bribery, right? After 1951, when these 33 kids were arrested, people said, oh, we've cleaned it up. That's it. Well, there was another point-shaving scandal in 1961. And then there was another one in 1978, and there was one in the 80s, and there was one in the 90s. Until you have a situation, until you address the kind of root problem of the disjunction between the amount of money in the game and the players' inability to partake of any of that money that they are creating, you're always going to have a situation where there's at least a risk of bribery.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there any other takeaways that you see from the story that you also think has resonance?
Well, let me start by saying that the kind of history that I do is really narrative history. It's novelistic in its approach. It's all true. I'm not making anything up. Everything in the book is taken from a historical source and is cited and, in the endnotes and so forth. But I'm trying to write it in a novelistic way so that readers don't just know what happened, but really feel what it was like to be there, to feel what it was like to be in the dark in the moments before a game at Madison Square Garden or up in the Catskills hotels in the Borscht Belt where the players were mingling with gamblers and gangsters, and Times Square with the flea circuses and the arcades and all of that. So that's really what I was trying to create in the book, is that kind of novelistic sense of the time and the place. But hand in hand with that, what I was really trying to do was to create, as much as I possibly could, a kind of more complete, more nuanced, perhaps more sympathetic understanding of who these young men were and what their lives were like, the pressures that were existing, their joys and their hardships, to try to get beyond the newspaper headlines that just condemned them as criminals, and try to understand them in the full richness of their lives as sympathetic young men, some of them perhaps more sympathetic than others, but people who were recognizable as individuals, much like us. And to have a reader try to think through, what would I have done? What would I have done if I were in that situation? Would I have acted the way that they did? Perhaps I would have, perhaps I wouldn't have, but it's a way for us to try to interrogate ourselves in a way about our own morality, our own actions in the future.
Right. Definitely not a clear-cut thing. So lots to contemplate with that. Well, the book is The City Game, and listeners can check it out by looking it up. So, Matthew, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this story with us.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it too.
So that is the episode for today. First off, I want to give a shout out to the Spy Masters for the Knowlton's Rangers. Vic Austin, Chris, Rob Matlock, Alan Baker, Beverly Engel, Jake Harrington, Todd Warren, William Ivey, Joyce Norman, Tyler from Colorado, Josh Reddick, Daniel Lawson, Marlene, Michael, Tim Clark, David Powell, Moondoggy from Ohio, Melissa, Christopher Main, Carl from Norway, and Baron Fraser. I'll explain what that is in a second. If you like the show and want to help it grow, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, like and subscribe to the show on the podcast player of your choice. This helps spread the word about the show. 2, join our Facebook group. Here we can keep the discussion going about new episodes, and you can talk about what you like and didn't like. And you can find this group if you just search for History Unplugged on Facebook. 3, we have an online store with t-shirts, phone covers, and other accessories featuring awesomely bad history puns that were crowdsourced by you, the audience. And you can find that if you go to public.com and look for History Unplugged, or you just go to historyonthenet.com and look for our store there. 4, and this is really the best way to dive deep with History Unplugged, that's to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you know your American history, you know the Knowlton's Rangers were an elite spy and reconnaissance group in the American Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the membership program of History Unplugged. You can join at 3 levels. If you join at the level of Scout, you can hear all the episodes of History Unplugged completely ad-free and get early access to new episodes, at least a week early. If you join at the Intelligence Officer level, you get special bonus episodes, like a 10-part series on the World War II hero Audie Murphy, a multi-part series called Ottoman Lives about different people in the Ottoman Empire, and a series called Rendezvous with Death that looks at biographical profiles of Americans who went to fight in World War I before America entered the war. And the last level is Spy Master, where you get all that stuff, but you also get 3 hardcover history books, Forging a President, How the Wild West Created Teddy Roosevelt, Race to the Top of the World, Richard Byrd and the First Flight to the North Pole, and The Last Fighter Pilot, the true story of the final combat mission of World War II. Another bonus is you can choose a history topic for me to focus on for an entire episode that can go up to an hour, and I'll answer whatever question you have for me, and you get a shout out at the end of each episode. If you want to learn how to become a member of the Knowlton's Rangers, go to patreon.com/unplugged. That's patreon.com/unplugged. All right, well, that is all for my spiel. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast, from ancient Greece to the Cold War and everything else in between. See you next time.